Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and deceased. It is I, Emily Sophia, aka M Mighty Sophia, here again to break down for you all the latest episode and, in fact, the season premiere of The Walking Dead. We are on Season 7, Episode 1. It has a very long title, and thus I wrote it down for myself, and it is The Day Will Come Where You Won't Be, which, as I understand, is actually a reference to a quote from the first season of The Walking Dead. But anyways, that's what I am here to talk about. There are going to be spoilers aplenty in this review, so I'd like to let you know that before I dive into the mad thick of things. And just to answer a couple of your inquiries up at the top of this review, no, I do not watch The Talking Dead. I really just don't have time. I've got time for this show only, and thus, number 2, I don't watch Fear the Walking Dead. So, any Walking Dead related content that I will be doing in the future is about this show. So now, let us get into this business. So normally, I like to do my reviews hot off the presses while my blood is still pumping, adrenaline coursing through my veins, my emotions and thoughts are hot off the presses, which is an approach that comes with its pros and cons, of course. But I kind of had to sit back after this premiere because I spent so many months locked in a state of just unremitting bitterness towards this show. And I need to be honest with you guys because I know that there are going to be many of you coming to this review with just overflowing enthusiasm and love for the show, and you've been super into it and you're par for the course and you're ready for the nitty-gritty and the emotional brutality. That's your jam, right? Some of you are going to be coming to this review equally as disenchanted as myself, feeling really disillusioned with the show, especially from the stunt that they pulled with the finale of the 6th season. And now this episode begs the question, was the wait worth it? And I don't necessarily have a solid, straightforward answer to that because, like, I'm still trying to figure out if the payoff is worth it and if I can find it in my heart to forgive the show and the minds who were behind the decision regarding the previous season's finale. I just really want the show, at least from here on freaking out, to take a story-centric approach, to take their attention away from the viewership for just a fraction of a second and to just really let the creative energy flow and let that translate in terms of the flow and the pacing and the stories that we get in the show, because they have an incredible setting to work with, an incredible cast, and really interesting characters that can go in so many different directions. And when they pull the shit that they did with the 6th season finale, withholding the identity, or identities plural, of the ones who are going to meet the vampire bat owned by Negan, in doing that, it isolated so many people who, like, I don't need to get into all this. You guys have heard the complaints for forever and a day. This episode it definitely dwelled in the torture porn zone for quite a bit of time. It was very dramatic, very sentimental, very intense. I do want to say that my favorite aspect of the episode by far was Jeffrey Dean Morgan's performance as Negan. That guy is a reckoning force, and just the levity with which he deals out these punishments, with which he completely emasculates Rick and strips him of any facade of leadership that he could possibly think he might possess. Really, really, really fine work. Jeffrey Dean Morgan he's already rocked the role with such pizzazz. But as far as the emotional impact of this premiere goes, it wasn't necessarily a home run for me. And in fact, I had already spoken with a lot of people theorizing who would die in this episode. And my prediction is one that was shared by many, that Abraham and Glenn would be the ones to kick the bucket. And that they did in very shockingly gruesome fashion, considering that we're still working within the confines of cable television here. And that's the kind of stuff, the blood and brain guts, that you're likelier to see in like the premium cable fare, Game of Thrones status. I mean, I would be very curious to know how exactly the crew at The Walking Dead were able to get that to fly at their 9 to 10 p.m. airtime, because whoa baby, was that nasty. But I'd already kind of hardened my heart and brain, like, just coming into this episode. And I mean, my expectations were certainly met on many levels. I had a strong feeling that Abraham was going to be the first up to bat, and that he was, and it was really gnarly and difficult to sit through. And then, of course, as soon as Negan turned his attention to Rosita, actually, that was when Daryl let his freak flag fly and decided to attempt to dissuade Negan from further violent action, as it were. And just how well did that work out? Just how well. And so, instead of taking out his divine wrath on Daryl for his transgression, Negan decided to simply have at it with whoever he saw fit in that moment, just to make Daryl, and by proxy the rest of the crew, experience what it means to disobey his word. And so I predicted, and many other people did, I'm not patting myself on the back or anything, because it's not an original idea of mine. It was something I heard stuff through the grapevine, and I was like, yeah, that resonates with me, and I agree with that. So that was exactly the way that I pictured the dominoes getting knocked down, and surely it unfolded as such. And it's quite funny because I managed somehow to look away at the very exact moment at which Glenn's eyeball popped out. And I am so glad that I accidentally averted my gaze, because of all the forms of violence that I can stomach, there are a few select types that I absolutely cannot deal with, and I will look away without any shame. Just don't want that stuff in my head. As it turns out, I'm also a very avid dreamer, so there are just certain things that I try to keep out of my brain, because I don't know what my midnight brain is gonna do with that information later. Stuff pertaining to needles, things of that nature, can't deal with it. Also can't deal with eyeball stuff in general. There was a scene in I believe it was the first season of Hannibal that involved eyeball related jabbing, and I became very ill in my stomach intestinal zone, like legitimately. And so I don't know how bad that actually was, because I looked away, and I am very happy with that decision, because what I did see was it's pretty gutsy, pretty gutsy. But that is, of course, not what I come into the show for, and really what it's about at this point for me is is the characters themselves, and certainly the creative minds behind this episode really wanted to drive home the effects that that Negan's killings had on everyone. The psychological impact was definitely played out to an extreme, maybe in part to kind of pad out the episode a bit, again, because of just the disjointedness of this whole story arc and splitting it halfway down the middle just to be able to keep the audience in suspense for months on end. But yeah, at the beginning of the episode, we started off with a scene that was actually posted on YouTube and AMC's other streaming outlets a few weeks ago at the very least. The close-up shots with Negan really boring into Rick after both of the killings have already taken place, and he's asking one of his boys about Rick's inventory, decides on a weapon to take on their little bro road trip, and then Negan proceeds to drag him along in the RV for a rip-roaring road adventure. And during that time, Negan thrusts him out headlong into a sea of walkers, and Rick eventually makes his way to the top of the RV and collapses in a scene that mirrors one of the most iconic scenes from the first season, which is Rick laying on top of what I believe was it the tank? And that in the city scene, y'all know what I'm talking about. If I messed it up at all, I'm sure that you're already conjuring up that image in your mind. But yeah, and so we're seeing flashbacks initially, and then we also see Rick processing what could happen or could have happened, and it's presented so jarringly and rapidly that for a split second we think, oh, did everyone just die? Is this the red outdoor wedding that's going down here? But that's all in Rick's head, and he is very methodically experiencing the imagined loss of each member of his little apocalyptic family. And for as affecting as that stuff could be, it still didn't hit as close to home for me. Again, simply because I have spent all of these months just stuck up in my head and so furious about the way that things went down. I think that I've gotten to a point where I'm really kind of meta-analyzing things, and so my sincere hope is that the rest of the 7th season is going to pull me out of that mentality and really allow myself to completely become lost in the story and what's unfolding. And I just don't want this emphasis on wallowing in pain and misery in this post-apocalyptic landscape and now under Negan's regime. Like, there has to be some balance. There has to be some forward progression. Like, I just really want to see a new era unfold for the show. And that's kind of how the season has been described by its executive producers and directors, and everybody's like, this is the dawn of a new era. And so long as that is what it is, then okay. I will do my best to bury the hatchet, swallow my pride, and move on. But like I said, I have just become very cynical over the past few months, and so this stuff is really hard for me. And I sit there like, yeah, I could see how this would be really emotional for somebody. And don't get me wrong, like, I wasn't just sitting there like, oh, would you look at that? Like, it was pretty brutal stuff. I was feeling the tension in my loins and my groin and my butt and just all the places where you clench and these kinds of things happen. that was probably too much information, but I'm gonna move right along. So yes, like I certainly had a response to this stuff, but it was also just kind of tempered by my analytical brain kicking in and thinking like, man, they could have. And so I've been stuck in that zone, and if you're not, that's wonderful and great, and I wholeheartedly respect that. Now I do have to say that I think one thing that was a little bit too overly sentimentalized was that one of the last scenes of the imagined dinner party with all of everybody, the whole family, and at this long picnic table, Glenn holding his son, and just that was just a little tad bit far on the sap spectrum, if you will. But again, losing characters like Abraham, his humor and quirks and demeanor will certainly be missed. And of course, I mean, Glenn has been here since the dawn of time and is such a recognizable figure who has been so loyal and faithful to the team. You know, I am sure that I could look back and create my own little montage of favorite moments and just recalling all the ways in which he has been such a powerful player in the show. But I'm still working through my angst, okay? So I will say though, I did actually, I teared up at the end of the episode watching Maggie having to process everything and just thinking about the child that she is bringing into this world and wondering, man, is her body even going to be able to sustain the pregnancy at this point? Like, she's been so ill, and now having to just become completely immersed in grief like this. I just fear for her so much. And my understanding is that she really rises to prominence in a big way in the comics, and so I know that she has conquered insurmountable odds with the way that she lost everybody from her father to her sister Beth, you know. I think Herschel's death is probably one of the most affecting deaths in the show for me, and I believe that was handled really well. This is still, the bad taste is in my mouth to this day. No matter how many times I try to brush my pearly whites and rinse the badness away, still a little bit peeved. It's just gonna give the show a much bigger margin to impress me, basically. I don't think I said that the way that I had conceived it in my mind, but I really just want to be insanely impressed. Now, getting back to Negan a little bit, he was definitely, this was his episode. Let's be real. He was dishing out everything that he wanted to, going to every possible lengths to show that he was completely and utterly in control. And in that way reminded me a lot of characters like, say, Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones, who was able to assert his authority over Theon, basically transforming him into Reek. And I hope that that's not what's going to become of Rick, who has been on an incredibly tumultuous journey, to the point that he almost had to chop off his own son's arm. Now, I thought, and many other people did too, that Negan was gonna take that axe and just do a little bit of sushi action on Rick's hand, because, yeah, that's a thing that is relevant to the comics from what I understand, and I don't know if that, I mean, it's spoilers, but then there's almost like this public domain of knowledge about the comics just because of how insanely popular this show is and how often those parallels are drawn. I'm sorry if I just ruin anything for anybody, but it's such ubiquitous stuff. Anyway, I thought for sure that was going to go down. Then in my metagaming mind, I was like, oh, logistically, it's tough to cover up for that, even though we had Herschel lose a leg seasons ago, and they were able to carry that thing forward and have him limp around and be as amazing as ever. But yeah, so when it came to that moment with Carl, that Abraham and Isaac situation, that I actually like that literary biblical connection, if you will. If you're not familiar with the story of Abraham and Isaac, basically God calls out to Abraham and tells him to take his beloved son Isaac up into the mountains and sacrifice him on a burnt altar. So Abraham certainly does not wish to do that, but he obeys the Lord's command and takes his son, who is constantly asking what's going to happen to him, and then they get up to the place where it's got to go down, and then Abraham says, the Lord is going to provide the animal for the sacrifice, because that's what they're going to do. And then he puts his son down there, and then God's like, actually, no. You did what I said, and thus you don't have to go through with it. And I'm going to make your future generations as numerous as the stars in the sky, and it's all great. On the flip side, you got Negan, who is putting Rick through this fresh hell in order to take everything away from him, to make sure that Rick completely cedes all authority to him. So that reversal is kind of cool, and I enjoyed that juxtaposition for sure. But yeah, so I didn't get really emotional until the very end, where everyone is left behind with nothing but each other, going and taking the bodies into the woods, and then Rick drives off, and the new era begins. So that is where I'm going to leave my review. I hope that you understand my grievances, if not agree with them. I mean, whatever perspective you're coming from, I accept that. So let me know your thoughts and your hopes and predictions for the season. I will be journeying with you guys week after week and breaking down Westworld and hoping to bring in a couple of other new series too. So thank you guys so much. Anything I forgot, bring it up in the comments below. And yeah, as always, take care. And I will be back before you know it.